Hello everyone and welcome back to the forge. Now today we're going to be taking this big old chunky piece of leaf spring you see laying here on this anvil. It's a nice thick piece and we're going to be turning it into, we're going to be forging out a big old Bowie chopper. So let's go ahead and get the forge lit up, get that piece of leaf spring straightened out and get to work. We had kind of a gnarly spot right here on the end of this where when we was unwinding that coil on the end that it got kind of a cold shut. So I used the hot cut hardy and cut this piece off, but we've got some spots here if we don't address that are going to give us some problems. I'm going to take this over to the grinder, grind this off good and clean. You can also use a rasp or a file to do this with, but it just takes a lot longer. I'm going to take it over 36 grit belt, knock it off, get it good and cleaned up, and then we'll move on to forging this blade out. Let's get to work. All right, got that bad boy all cleaned up. No more cold shuts. Let's get it tossed back in the forge and get to making this Bowie knife. is where we currently are. I'll let the steel cool down enough I can lay it here on our paper and just give it a quick look. We are short in some areas and way too long in the others, which is fine. This is a rough forging. So I'm going to put this back in the forge. We're going to forge up more of this, what our harpoon point will be right here. And we're going to bring this belly down a little bit more, as well as work this area down here, just to make sure we fall into the area so when we grind it we can get the shape that we want. So let's get it tossed back in there and get it finished up. Almost there. And there's the rough forging of our Bowie knife. We got more than enough material to work with to get our final profile that we're wanting. I'm going to go ahead and let this cool down, and then we will get our profile drawn out on the blade, grind it to shape, and move on to the next step, getting it ready for heat treat. Alright, there is our template laid out on our blade. Like I said, we had a little too much material here in the front, but having too much material is never a bad thing. It's when you don't have enough that the problems begin to start up. Then shorter knives happen and smaller knives happen. I just wanted to make certain that we had enough to get the blade profile I was aiming for, and we did. So let's go over here. I'm going to take the bandsaw first, cut off a lot of this excess here to save on my grinding belts, and then we'll go in there to the grinder and get to cleaning this up and get it ready to start grinding all this scale off and start seeing what we got underneath. And so we got the profile ground into our Bowie knife here, and as you can tell, we have some areas like the tang here and like this tip up here that's way too thick. The tang I'm not too worried about right now because we have to grind in the shoulders and everything here anyway down the road. The tip though I need to address before I start putting in the bevels. As you can see, it stays pretty consistent through this point and then begins to flare out. All of the flare out is actually on one side. We got one side that's good and straight, one side that's proud of the other. So I'm going to use my layout fluid and go around the sides here and take my caliper and follow the straightest edge that I've got to determine where I need to remove the material on this tip at, so we have a good straight surface to work with. So after that, it'll just be cleaning it up, grinding in the bevels, thinning out the tang, getting the shoulders established here, and then we'll move on to thermal cycling and heat treat. But so far so good. I like the profile it's got. I think it'll be nice. It already feels pretty good in the hand. So let's get this marked out and get on to the next step. Alright, that right there, that bottom silver line is how much we need to take off to make this blade ground straight. So let's head back to the grinder, knock that off the tip. Alright, Alright, that's a good stopping point for this video. I'll take some time in between part 1 and part 2 and clean this up some more and get our bevels roughed in a little, and so we can start part 2 of this video with the heat treat and moving on to addressing our shoulders here and getting the final bevels ground in, our clip point up there, or our harpoon point up there, and get to work on our hardware, or our hand guard, and look at our handle material, which I think I'm going to use bog oak for, and move on from there. So far so good. Like I said, I really like the profile of this style of knife. With that being said, I appreciate you for joining us today. If you would hit that subscribe button, remember to ring the bell for notifications so you can be notified of our newest content as it comes out, as well as part 2 of this. I appreciate you very much. Have a good one. We'll catch you in the next one. Bye-bye. Hello everyone, and welcome back to the Forge. Now, our last video on this Bowie project, we got the blade forged, we got the profile ground in, got it all cleaned up. So let's go ahead and get the grinder fired up, get these bevels roughed in so we can get this sucker heat treated. Alright, we've got our bevels roughed in nicely on each side. I put some layout fluid here on what will be the harpoon point of the knife. Used my stone here and my height gauge to scribe a line so I can grind it in. I don't want this to be a zeroed edge up here, just enough that it looks real nice and everything. So now we're going to head back to the grinder. I'm going to go ahead and grind this in, then we should be ready for heat treat. Alrighty, let's get after it. Alright, we've got all of our bevels ground in here, roughed in for heat treat. Got our harpoon point there roughed in. So we're ready to start thermal cycling this bad boy and get it heat treated. So let's get the forge lit up and get on it. Alright, I got the forge getting up to temperature. We're going to go ahead and thermal cycle this 3 times before the quench. Alright, our Bowie knife is finished tempering, so now it's time to jump back on the grinders and get our bevels finished. Get it all ready to turn our attention to the guard and to the handle. So let's get after it. Alright, now that we're finished grinding our bevels in, we're going to go ahead and get this sucker hand sanded up and then move our attention onto the guard and the handle. So let's go ahead and get it to the house and get to work.
Can I
Alright, this is where we are currently. I've got the tang all cleaned up, the shoulders cleaned up, everything ready to go in this part. I have picked out the guard material, which will just be this piece of mild steel here. Our next step is to scribe the lines onto it and get the slot milled out. So let's go ahead and get to work on that. Alright, what I want to do now is I'm going to pick out a bit that's just shy of the thickness of our blade here, of our ricasso area. Looks like it's going to be about a 3/16. So that looks like it'll work out real well. Punch a starting point, get the hole drilled, and then get over to the milling machine. Alright, I'm going to use our bit here just to get a spacing idea here. Good starting point there for our bit. Alright, as we currently set right now, the guard's fitting up really nicely. I mean, there's hardly any gapping. A couple of strokes with the file, it would be a perfect fit up. But I'm trying to challenge myself more lately and trying to do new things. And so I'm thinking I'm going to go ahead and reapply my layout fluid to this. And I'm going to use my rotary carver and try to inset the ricasso of this down into the guard. I've never have done that before. I know a lot of master smiths and more experienced bladesmiths do it for a nicer, cleaner fit up. So I'm going to give it a try and see how it works out. Worst case scenario, it doesn't work out at all and I got to make a new guard. But oh well. We'll see what happens. Alright, so I'm going to scribe it out and we're going to see how this goes. here's what we worked on yesterday. We got this guard slotted out here, and then we got it recessed in here for the ricasso area of the Bowie knife to set into. And here's what we ended up with. It seats in there pretty well. It's not 100% perfect, but I didn't think it would be. This is the first time I've tried this technique. Fairly happy with it though overall. So I'm going to go ahead and take this guard over to the grinder and get it cleaned up, get all this dicam off of it, get the edges cleaned up so we can lay out the design of our guard, and then move on to our handle. So I'll catch you in just a minute when all that's done. Alright, in my original design of this, I was thinking of going with like this mini S guard design, but I think I want to go with a smaller straight guard. I just think that style would lend itself really well to this design and help it have a really good flow. So the next step here, we've got our guard all cleaned up. We're ready to lay out our lines, but I want to go ahead and move to the handle and start getting that figured out. Go ahead and get the tang in set so we can lay out the lines for our handle and make sure all the lines of this knife flows together really well. So that's what we're going to turn our attention to next, is the handle material. Alright, now I've got my templates made up for my handle here, and we're going to be using that on the piece of bog oak, and I also got my template made up for the guard here. So I need to go ahead and scribe the line because we're going to have to cut this to length. It's a little bit too long, and so I'm going to go ahead and mark it up with the layout fluid. Use my scribing pen to go ahead and get that marked and get it cut off so we can move on to getting this handle rough cut. Alright, so that's a good stopping point for today's video. We got our blade heat treated. We got it ground to close to our finish. I got to go back and sand it again. We got our guard fixed up and ready to fit up on the blade. We got that recess in there so it can fit good and snug, good and secure. And we got our handle material figured out and cut out and everything. And I think once it's all assembled, I think it'll look really nice. So, let's see here. I think it'll look really nice. Let's take a look at it. Alright, so far so good. I'm going to try to do a nice sculpted handle on this. I haven't really done any real sculpted handles before, so this ought to be a fun little challenge here. But so far so good. I appreciate you for joining us today. If you would hit that subscribe button, remember to ring the notification bell as well as hit the tab to be notified of newest content when it comes out. I appreciate you very much, and we'll catch you on the next one. Bye-bye. Hello everyone, and welcome back to the Forge. Now today we're going to jump back into our Bowie project. We're going to get this sucker wrapped up. The first thing we're going to start focusing on is this guard right here. We need to get some reference lines scribed on this guard so we know how thin we want to grind it, so we know where we want it to mate up with our handle here. So let's go ahead and start laying them out, and then we'll get over the grinder and start shaping it. Alright, during this part of the process, everything is going to be scribed a little thick. I'll eventually clean it up and grind it down thinner. but I would rather have too much material than not enough as I work on this. So I'm going to go to scribe in the reference lines for the thickness of the lugs, as well as scribe in the reference lines to where our tang hole is, so I can keep track of that when we get ready to start grinding our handle down here in a little bit. So I'm going to go ahead and jump on that. Alright, now what I've done is I've used my height gauge to scribe a line all the way around the handle here, and that will be the finished thickness of the handle. Of course, we'll sculpt it from there, but this will give us some lines when we go to the grinder and grind off all this excess wood here that we can follow to keep everything uniform. Alright, our handle is to a much better place now. It's the proper width. I did leave it a little bit big. It's still a little bit oversized, but that's mainly just for final fit up purposes. Now we're going to move back to our guard here. I've got some lines scribed here on the front. That's the overall thickness of our guard, or width of our guard. So we're going to take it in here to the bandsaw and we're going to go ahead and cut it, and then we'll get the layout on it properly. Alright, we got our guard cut and cleaned up on the grinder. Mates up with the handle a little bit better. Remember the handle, I left the handle a little bit thick, and so it's not perfectly flush because I'm not ready for that yet. But now we're going to come along here and we're going to mark where the ricasso meets up with our guard and scribe it on the outsides, so we can then begin the process of forming the lugs for our Bowie knife here, because we want everything to flow. We want all these lines to line up all the way to the end of the handle. So I'm going to go ahead and get the Sharpie. We're going to mark it. Then we're going to use our height gauge here to scribe us a good line there, and then we'll begin the process of grinding that shape. There's our marks right there. We will come in here and we will draw the curve from here up to here to form the lugs for this. And with these marks here, we'll know that everything flows together. Everything should be straight and in line. Alright, there's the thickness of our lugs to start out. I will thin that down quite a bit when we do the final forming of them. So now I just need to come in here and draw the curves I want, and we'll be set and ready to go to the grinder. Alright, we've got our guard shape for the most part. You can see kind of the design I'm going for here. It is not perfect yet. It's still pretty rough. It'll be refined in the handle shaping process and everything else. I'm going to go ahead and jump on the grinder again and clean up these sides and get some of these deeper scratches out so they'll be easier to work out later on. And then we're going to move on to bedding the handle. I want this to be a nice clean fit up. As you see, it's kind of loose right now. I want a good clean fit up every time, so when we go in to drill the handle pin and everything else, we'll be nice and straight with no concerns, no problems. So let's head back over to the grinder and get this guard cleaned up, and we'll move on to the next step. Cause I've been running this world without you. Alright, for the most part, I got the really deep scratches out, which is what I was aiming for. I'm not too worried at this point about getting them all out, because I'm going to have to come back in when I shape the handle and thin these lugs down even more for the look that I'm going for. So far so good. Cleaned up fairly reasonable. So now we're going to move on to bedding the tang and head off to the next step. Now you saw when I bedded the tang on this Bowie knife here that I wrapped the tang with plastic wrap first. And the reason I did that is because even though we're using petroleum jelly or something else to keep the steel from contacting and sticking to the epoxy, sometimes it still does. And so I actually had that happen on the railroad spike katana build here a video or so ago. The epoxy got stuck when I was bedding the handle for it. It was a nightmare to get loose. So I wrapped it with saran wrap. I watched Liam Hoffman do that on some of his chef's knives. And if you do it right, wrap it tight. You don't have to wrap it a whole bunch of layers, you know, a couple or so. And then cover that with Vaseline. Whenever you fill your tang with epoxy and stick it in there, it's pretty much guaranteed that it's going to come out with no problem. And then you just bring it out. You just unwrap it, and your tang is good and clean. Your handle's bedded, and you're all set. So that's a nice little tip to keep in mind. A lot of you may already know how to do that. A lot of you may not, but it works really well in a lot of different projects. So now at this point, we've got everything ready to drill the handle pin. Now I'm going to go ahead and drill this right now, even though the handle's not shaped, because that will allow us to hold this handle in place and do some of the contouring of the handle here, get it kind of down to its final dimensions before we actually do the final finish and glue up of this Bowie knife. So let's go ahead and get our pin location marked out, get it drilled, and move on to the next step. Alright, now as I drill this handle pin location, I'm not going to drill all the way through. I'm going to drill down until this bit touches the steel and marks the steel, because the moment it hits that steel, if I start trying to drill through, this bit's going to develop a little bit of wobble and it's going to wallow out the hole here on the top. So I'm going to drill through, hit the steel, get the bit to bite into it, take this handle off, finish drilling through the tang, and then put it back together and go ahead and drill out the other side. That should help us keep a pretty straight hole. Get the that we know our pin fits all the way through, everything's good to go, we can come in here and get our template that we're going to use for our handle. I'll outline it, and now we can start shaping the handle. Okay, so far so good. Let's get the template laid out in here, get it traced out, and move on to getting this handle shaped.
Don't let me carry it alone. I feel like my head is full of stone. There's not a whole lot I can do when all my visions have come true. Don't come round and waste my time. A generation of my time. There is nothing we can do. Stop this plague from breaking through. Don't come round and waste my time. A generation of my kind. There is nothing we can do to stop this plague from breaking through.
Alright, we've got everything ready here. I've got my guard rough shaped and ready to glue up. Our handle's been rough formed. It's ready, so now we just got to put some epoxy in this handle, get everything together, let it glue up, and then we'll be ready to finish the shaping process on the grinder.
There's a place I have never been, on the cover of a magazine, alright. Gotta stay till the bitter end, on the upshot of fallen trends, alright. Is it time for me? There's no guarantee. I see everybody hazy, no one here to fade me. I'm crowding with myself, stunning visions of the fairies, running through the prairies, lifted by the sun.
Alright, this is where we currently are right now. I've got a little hand sanding to do on the handle to get all the scratch marks out, and then I'll catch you at the end when we show the finished product. That wraps up my Bowie knife. I appreciate y'all for joining us on this 3-part series. If you would, hit that subscribe button. Remember to ring the notifications bell to be informed of our newest content as it posts. I appreciate you very much for watching. You have a good one. We'll catch you on the next one. Bye-bye.